In the quaint village of St. Mary Mead, a shadowy figure slipped through the misty dawn, clutching a cryptic note about a sparrow's nest that hid more than feathers, secrets that could unravel lives. Welcome to the gripping tale of Miss Marple's Secret of the Sparrow's Nest, where every whisper hides a clue. Grab a cup of tea, take a seat, and let the mystery unfold. If you're enjoying the story, hit that subscribe button. Your support means a lot to us. Chapter 1. The Whispered Invitation. Nestled in the rolling hills of England's countryside, St. Mary Mead was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still, with its thatched cottages, blooming gardens, and the ever-present chime of the church bell marking the hours. But on this crisp autumn morning, an undercurrent of unease stirred the air. Miss Jane Marple, the elderly spinster with a keen eye for human nature, sat in her cosy parlour, knitting a soft woolen scarf while gazing out at the village green. She had lived here all her life, observing the comings and goings of her neighbours with the precision of a detective, though few suspected the depths of her insight. Today, however, something felt off. A subtle shift, like the first ripple in a pond before a stone breaks the surface. It began with the postman's arrival. Old Mr. Higgins, with his weathered cap and reliable bicycle, pedalled up to her gate and handed her a plain envelope sealed with a blob of red wax. No stamp, no return address, just her name scrawled in elegant looping script. Miss Marple thanked him with her usual polite nod, but as she retreated inside, her fingers trembled slightly, not from age, but from anticipation. She slit the envelope open with a letter opener and unfolded the single sheet of paper. The message was brief. Dear Miss Marple, the Sparrow's Nest holds a secret that only you can untangle. Meet me at Willow Cottage at dusk. Come alone. A friend in need. No signature, but the words carried a weight of urgency that piqued her curiosity. As she pondered the note over a pot of Earl Grey tea, Miss Marple's mind raced through the village's recent gossip. Willow Cottage, abandoned for years after old Mrs. Hargrove's passing, had been the talk of the tea circles lately. Rumours swirled of strange lights flickering in its windows at night, and whispers of hidden treasures, or perhaps something more sinister. Was this connected to the recent disappearance of young Eliza Thorne, the baker's daughter, who had vanished 2 weeks prior without a trace? Or maybe it tied into the feud between the wealthy Squire Harrington and his estranged nephew, who had returned from London under mysterious circumstances. Miss Marple knew better than to jump to conclusions, but her instincts, honed by years of solving petty crimes and deeper mysteries alike, told her this was no ordinary invitation. She decided to prepare subtly, slipping on her sensible tweed coat and sturdy walking shoes. She tucked the note into her handbag, alongside a small magnifying glass and a notebook for jotting observations. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the hedgerows, she set out on foot, her steps measured and unhurried. The path to Willow Cottage wound through a dense copse of trees, where birds flitted about, their songs fading into the encroaching twilight. Along the way, she passed familiar faces, the vicar tending his roses, who waved cheerfully, Mrs. Price at the post office closing up shop with a curious glance, and young Tommy, the errand boy, who nearly collided with her on his bike. "Evening, Miss Marple," he called, but she noted the flush on his cheeks. Nerves, perhaps, or something he was hiding. Arriving at the cottage just as dusk settled, Miss Marple paused at the overgrown gate. The building loomed like a forgotten relic, its ivy-covered walls cracked and windows shrouded in dust. A faint light glowed from within, and the door creaked open before she could knock. Standing there was a woman she vaguely recognized, Lydia Blackwood, the reclusive artist who had moved to the village only months ago. Lydia's eyes were wide with fear, her hands wringing a handkerchief. "Thank goodness you've come," she whispered, ushering Miss Marple inside. The parlour was dimly lit by a single lamp, cluttered with easels and half-finished paintings of birds, sparrows, to be precise, nesting in intricate detail. Over a hastily poured cup of tea, Lydia spilled her story. She had discovered an old diary hidden in the attic belonging to Mrs. Hargrove, revealing a long-buried scandal, a stolen heirloom, a betrayed love affair, and a map to a sparrow's nest that wasn't a bird's home at all, but a code for a secret compartment in the village church. "Someone knows I found it," Lydia confessed, her voice trembling. "I've been followed, and last night my studio was ransacked. I need your help, Miss Marple, before it's too late." Miss Marple listened intently, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she absorbed every detail. She asked pointed questions. Who else knew about the diary? Had Lydia noticed any unusual visitors? The answers painted a picture of intrigue involving several villagers, each with motives that intertwined like threads in a tapestry. As the evening wore on, Miss Marple offered practical advice. "Start by securing your doors and windows," she said gently. "Keep a log of anything suspicious, no matter how small, and trust no one until we uncover the truth." Lydia nodded gratefully, but just as Miss Marple rose to leave, a sharp knock echoed at the door. 3 insistent raps that made both women freeze. Who could it be at this hour? Miss Marple's hand tightened on her handbag, her mind already piecing together the next clue. With the foundation of the mystery laid bare, the threads of suspicion begin to weave tighter in the chapters ahead, drawing Miss Marple deeper into a web of secrets that could change St. Mary Mead forever. Chapter 2. Shadows in the churchyard. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth as Miss Marple stepped out of Willow Cottage, her mind buzzing with Lydia's revelations. The knock at the door had been nothing more than a curious neighbour, Mrs. Baxter, dropping off a jar of homemade jam, but it had left both women on edge. Miss Marple bid Lydia good night with a reassuring smile, though her thoughts were already racing toward the village church. The diary's mention of a sparrow's nest hidden there was no coincidence, and she intended to investigate before anyone else could muddy the waters. The church of St. Mary Mead stood at the heart of the village, its ancient stone walls bathed in moonlight. Miss Marple approached quietly, her footsteps soft on the gravel path that wound through the churchyard. The gravestones, some tilted with age, seemed to watch her as she passed, their inscriptions barely legible in the dim glow. She paused at the heavy oak door, its iron hinges creaking as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was cool and musty, scented with old hymnals and wax. The stained glass windows cast faint, colourful shadows across the pews, and the silence was so complete it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. Miss Marple moved toward the chancel, where the diary had hinted the secret compartment lay. She recalled Lydia's description, a carving of a sparrow tucked beneath the altar marking the spot. Kneeling carefully, her knees weren't as forgiving as they once were. She ran her fingers along the worn wood of the altar's base. Her touch was methodical, tracing every groove until she felt a slight give. A small panel, no larger than a book, clicked under her pressure. With a gentle tug, it slid open, revealing a dusty hollow. Inside was a velvet pouch, heavy with something metallic. She opened it to find an ornate silver locket, engraved with the initials E.H., likely Eliza Hargrove, the former owner of Willow Cottage. As she examined the locket, a faint rustle broke the silence. Miss Marple froze, her senses sharp. The sound came from the vestry, a small room off the chancel where the vicar kept his robes and records. Slipping the locket into her handbag, she rose and moved silently toward the noise. The vestry door was ajar, and through the crack she glimpsed a figure rummaging through a desk. The man's back was to her, but she recognized the broad shoulders and expensive coat of Squire Harrington, the village's wealthiest landowner. What was he doing here at this hour, rifling through papers with such urgency? She noted the way his hands shook, betraying a nervousness that didn't match his usual arrogance. Miss Marple retreated before he could spot her, her mind piecing together possibilities. Squire Harrington had been vocal about buying Willow Cottage, claiming it for a new development, but the village council had blocked him. Could the locket, or whatever it represented, be tied to his ambitions, or was he searching for something else entirely? Perhaps linked to Eliza Thorne's disappearance. She needed more information, and the locket was her only lead. Tucking her scarf tighter against the chill, she slipped out of the church and headed toward the vicarage, hoping to catch the vicar, Mr. Clement, before he retired for the night. The vicarage was a short walk away, its windows glowing warmly. Mr. Clement, a kindly man with a penchant for long sermons, welcomed her with surprise. Over a cup of cocoa, she steered the conversation toward the church's history, casually mentioning old carvings. "Oh, the Sparrow," Mr. Clement said, his eyes lighting up. "It's been there for centuries, part of a memorial to the Hargrove family. They were benefactors once, but their line died out, or so we thought." His words hinted at a deeper story, one he seemed reluctant to share. Miss Marple pressed gently, learning that Eliza Hargrove's death had left unanswered questions about a missing family heirloom, rumoured to be worth a fortune. As she left the vicarage, the village clock struck 11, its chimes echoing over the rooftops. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the locket, now safely hidden in her handbag. Its weight felt heavier than silver alone, as if it carried the burdens of those who had sought it. She glanced back at the church, its steeple a dark silhouette against the starry sky. Someone else was out there watching, waiting. A twig snapped in the distance and she quickened her pace, her heart steady, but her mind alert. The mystery was deepening, and the next clue lay just beyond her reach, waiting to be uncovered in the shadows of St. Mary Mead. The trail of secrets grows colder, but Miss Marple's resolve burns brighter, leading her toward a truth that could shake the village to its core. Chapter 3. The Locket's Whispered Legacy. Miss Marple arrived home under the cover of a starless night, the locket tucked securely in her handbag like a guarded secret. Her cottage welcomed her with the familiar creak of the front door and the soft glow of a lamp she had left burning in the window. She hung her coat on the peg and settled into her favourite armchair by the fire, which she stoked to life with a few pokes of the iron. The flames danced, casting flickering shadows across the room, and she finally allowed herself to examine the locket more closely. It was exquisitely crafted, with delicate filigree work depicting intertwined vines and a tiny sparrow perched on a branch. Pressing the clasp, it sprang open to reveal two faded photographs, one of a stern-looking gentleman with a moustache, the other of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. On the back of the locket's interior, etched in fine script, were the words, "To my beloved E, forever in the nest, J.H." Miss Marple's brow furrowed as she pondered the initials. E for Eliza Hargrove, perhaps, but J.H.? That could be James Harrington, the squire's late grandfather, known for his scandalous affairs back in the day. She rose to fetch her magnifying glass from the desk, its brass handle cool in her hand. Under the lens, the photographs revealed more details. The man wore a signet ring with the Harrington crest, and the woman held a bouquet of wildflowers, the kind that grew abundantly near Willow Cottage. This wasn't just an heirloom. It was a relic of a forbidden romance, one that might explain the squire's frantic search in the vestry. Miss Marple recalled village lore. James Harrington had been engaged to a society belle, but rumours persisted of a secret love with Eliza, a lowly artist's daughter. If this locket proved their affair, it could upend the Harrington family claim to their estate, especially if there was an illegitimate heir involved. She snapped the locket shut and placed it in a hidden compartment of her jewellery box, disguised as a simple wooden case. Sleep would not come easily tonight. Her mind was a whirl of connections, each one pulling her deeper into the enigma. The next morning dawned bright and crisp, with dew glistening on the spider webs that draped the garden hedges like lace. Miss Marple decided to pay a visit to the bakery where Eliza Thorne had worked before her vanishing. The shop was bustling with villagers queuing for fresh loaves and scones, the air thick with the aroma of yeast and cinnamon. Behind the counter stood Mr. Thorne, his face gaunt and eyes shadowed from worry. He served her a currant bun with mechanical politeness, but Miss Marple lingered, chatting about the weather before steering the conversation to his daughter. "Such a bright girl, Eliza," she said softly, her voice laced with sympathy. "Have the police found any leads?" Mr. Thorne shook his head, wiping flour from his hands on his apron. "Nothing, Miss Marple. She left for a walk after closing and never came back. Left her apron hanging, as if she'd return any moment." He paused, glancing around to ensure no one overheard. "But she did mention something odd a few days before. Said she'd found an old letter in the attic of our home, addressed to Mrs. Hargrove. Thought it was junk, but it mentioned a Sparrow's gift." Eliza was curious, always poking into history for her sketches. Miss Marple's interest sharpened like a needle. Eliza Thorne had been an aspiring artist, much like Lydia, and their paths might have crossed at the village art society. Thanking Mr. Thorne, she stepped out into the sunlight, her bun uneaten in its paper bag. The connection was forming: the diary, the locket, and now a letter. Perhaps Eliza had stumbled upon something related, drawing unwanted attention. She made her way to the Art Society's meeting hall, a converted barn on the outskirts of St. Mary Mead. The door was unlocked, and inside, canvases leaned against walls, palettes smeared with vibrant colours. Mrs. Dobson, the Society's chairwoman, was arranging easels for the afternoon class. A plump woman with rosy cheeks and a perpetual smile, she greeted Miss Marple warmly. "Come for a spot of painting, dear. We could use your steady hand for still lifes." Miss Marple demurred with a chuckle, instead inquiring about Eliza and Lydia. Mrs. Dobson's expression sobered. Poor Eliza, such talent, gone without a trace. She and Lydia were thick as thieves lately, collaborating on a series of bird paintings. Sparrows, oddly enough. Lydia brought in old sketches from Willow Cottage, said they inspired her. As they talked, Mrs. Dobson pulled out a portfolio of Eliza's work. Delicate watercolours of the village, including one of Willow Cottage shrouded in mist, with a sparrow nesting in the eaves. Hidden in the foliage, barely visible, was a tiny figure watching from the trees. Miss Marple borrowed her magnifying glass again. The figure resembled the squire's nephew, Reginald Harrington, with his distinctive limp from a war injury. Reginald had returned recently, claiming to help his uncle with estate matters, but whispers suggested he was after inheritance. Intrigued, Miss Marple thanked Mrs. Dobson and headed toward the Harrington estate, a grand manor house perched on a hill overlooking the village. The grounds were impeccably manicured, with rose bushes in full bloom and peacocks strutting across the lawns. She approached under the guise of collecting for the church fund, a basket of knitted goods in arm. The butler, a stoic man named Jenkins, admitted her to the drawing room, where Squire Harrington sat by a roaring fire, a brandy glass in hand despite the early hour. His face was flushed, eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept. "Miss Marple, to what do I owe this visit?" he boomed, though his voice lacked its usual bluster. She mentioned the fund, then casually brought up Willow Cottage. "Such a pity it's fallen into disrepair. I hear you're interested in acquiring it." The squire shifted uncomfortably, his fingers tightening on the glass. "Family history, you know. My grandfather had ties there, but the council's being stubborn." Probing further, Miss Marple mentioned the old rumours of James Harrington's affections. The squire's reaction was telling. A flicker of alarm crossed his features before he masked it with a laugh. Ancient gossip, nothing more. "Now, if you'll excuse me." As she was shown out, she caught sight of Reginald in the hallway, arguing in hushed tones with a maid. His limp was pronounced as he paced, and in his hand he clutched a crumpled paper. Perhaps another note. Outside, Miss Marple lingered by the gate, observing the estate's comings and goings. A delivery van arrived, unloading crates marked London Antiques, but one driver seemed out of place, his clothes too rough for the job. She noted his license plate, her memory sharp as ever. Returning home for lunch, a simple salad of garden greens and cheese, Miss Marple spread out her notes on the table. The pieces were aligning. The locket as proof of the affair, the diary revealing the hiding spot, Eliza's letter tying it to the present, and the Harringtons' desperation to cover it up. But why the disappearance? Had Eliza seen too much, or was she holding a key piece? Afternoon brought a knock at her door. Lydia Blackwood, looking even more frazzled, her hair dishevelled and paint stains on her dress. "Miss Marple, I found something else in the attic. A bundle of letters from James to Eliza. They speak of a child, born in secret, adopted out to avoid scandal." Lydia handed over the yellowed papers, tied with faded ribbon. Reading them, Miss Marple's eyes widened. The child was a boy, sent to relatives in Australia, but with a claim to the Harrington fortune if proven. As they discussed over tea, a sudden crash from the garden startled them. Rushing to the window, they saw a broken flower pot and a fleeing shadow darting toward the woods. Lydia gasped, "They're after the letters!" Miss Marple calmed her, suggesting they hide the bundle in her safe spot, but the intrusion confirmed it. Someone was closing in, perhaps Reginald or even the squire himself. Evening fell, and Miss Marple escorted Lydia back to Willow Cottage, advising vigilance. Alone again, she sat by the fire, the letter's words echoing in her mind. The Sparrow's nest wasn't just a compartment. It was a metaphor for the hidden family line, threatening to upend everything. The web tightens around unsuspected alliances, pulling Miss Marple toward revelations that echo through generations, as the village's facade begins to crack under the weight of buried truths. Chapter 4. The Stranger at the Crossroads. Miss Marple woke to the soft patter of rain against her cottage windows, the grey dawn casting a sombre mood over St. Mary Mead. The letters from James to Eliza, now safely hidden behind a loose brick in her fireplace, weighed heavily on her thoughts. A secret child, sent far away to protect the Harrington name, was no small matter. It could shift the entire balance of power in the village. She sipped her morning tea, her eyes scanning the garden where last night's intruder had fled. The broken flower pot lay in pieces, a stark reminder that someone was watching, perhaps closer than she realized. Today, she resolved to follow the trail of the mysterious delivery driver she'd spotted at the Harrington estate, whose rough demeanour and unmarked van had struck her as suspicious. After breakfast, Miss Marple donned her raincoat and a sturdy hat, its brim shielding her sharp eyes from the drizzle. She headed toward the village crossroads, where the local inn, the Sparrow's Rest, served as a hub for gossip and travellers. If anyone knew about strangers passing through, it would be Mrs. Finch, the innkeeper, whose knack for overhearing conversations rivaled Miss Marple's own. The inn was a cosy, timbered building with ivy climbing its walls, its sign creaking in the wet breeze. Inside, the warmth of a crackling fire greeted her, along with the scent of fresh-baked bread and ale. Mrs. Finch, a wiry woman with a quick smile, was polishing glasses behind the bar. "Miss Marple, out in this weather?" she exclaimed, waving her over. "What brings you here?" Feigning interest in local events, Miss Marple steered the conversation toward recent visitors. Mrs. Finch leaned in, her voice low. "Funny you ask. There's been a chap staying here the past week, calls himself Mr. Carter. Says he's a historian researching village archives, but he's not the bookish sort. Rough hands like a labourer, and he's been asking about Willow Cottage and the Hargrove family." She described a man in his 40s, with a weathered face, dark coat, and a habit of slipping out at odd hours. Miss Marple's mind clicked. Could this be the driver from the estate? She thanked Mrs. Finch, promising to return for the inn's next tea social, and stepped back into the rain, her curiosity burning brighter. Her next stop was the village archives, housed in a small room above the library. The archivist, Miss Clara, a bespectacled woman with a passion for local history, welcomed her warmly. Miss Marple inquired about records from the Hargrove era, particularly any adoptions or emigrations around the time of James Harrington's youth. Miss Clara, delighted by the request, produced a dusty ledger from the 1890s. Together, they pored over faded entries, finding a curious note. A boy, unnamed, born to an EH and sent to a family in Melbourne, Australia, under the care of a distant Hargrove cousin. The record was vague, but a scribbled margin note mentioned a gift of silver sent with the child, perhaps the locket. Miss Marple jotted down the details, her heart quickening. If this child's descendants had returned, they might be after their rightful claim. Leaving the library, Miss Marple noticed a man loitering across the street, his dark coat slick with rain. He turned away quickly, but not before she caught a glimpse of his face, scarred along the jaw, matching Mrs. Finch's description of Mr. Carter. She decided to follow him, keeping her distance as he headed toward the old mill, a derelict structure by the river. The path was muddy, and she moved carefully, her umbrella shielding her from both rain and suspicion. The mill's wheel was still, its timbers groaning under the weight of years. Through a broken window, she saw Carter inside, speaking in hushed tones with another figure, Reginald Harrington, his limp unmistakable. They exchanged a small package, and Carter slipped it into his coat before stepping out into the rain. Miss Marple ducked behind a tree as Carter passed, his boots squelching in the mud. She waited until he was out of sight, then approached the mill, peering inside. Reginald was gone, but on the floor lay a torn scrap of paper overlooked in their haste. She retrieved it, her gloved fingers brushing off dirt. It was a receipt for an antique dealer in London listing silver artifacts from Willow Cottage. The pieces were falling into place. Carter, likely no historian, was working with Reginald, perhaps to sell off Hargrove heirlooms or uncover the locket's value. But how did this connect to Eliza Thorne's disappearance? Had she seen them together, or found something they wanted kept hidden? Determined to confront Reginald, Miss Marple made her way back to the village, the rain now a steady downpour. She stopped by the post office to collect her thoughts, where Mrs. Price was sorting letters. Casually, Miss Marple asked if Reginald had received any packages lately. Mrs. Price nodded. "Aye, a parcel from London last week, marked urgent. Looked like documents, but he snatched it up quick. Documents, perhaps proof of the Harrington lineage, or something tying Reginald to Carter's scheme." Miss Marple thanked her and headed home, her mind racing. The rain had soaked through her coat, but she barely noticed, consumed by the puzzle. That evening, as she warmed herself by the fire, a sharp rap at the door startled her. It was Tommy, the errand boy, soaked to the bone and clutching a soggy note. "Found this by the mill, Miss Marple," he panted. "Thought you'd want to see it." The note, in the same elegant script as her invitation to Willow Cottage, read, "The Sparrow flies at midnight. Beware the hunter." Her pulse quickened. This was a warning, but from whom? And who was the hunter? She sent Tommy off with a shilling and a biscuit, then locked her door, the note clutched in her hand. The mystery was no longer just about a locket or a lost heir. It was a race against time, with unseen players circling closer. As the rain drums on, Miss Marple senses the storm is far from over, with secrets unravelling faster than her knitting, leading her toward a confrontation that could expose the heart of St. Mary Mead's hidden past. Chapter 5. The Midnight Warning. The cryptic note lay on Miss Marple's kitchen table, its ink smudged from the rain, but its words sharp in her mind. "The Sparrow flies at midnight. Beware the hunter." The hour was late, the village cloaked in a damp hush, but sleep was far from her thoughts. She lit a second candle, its flame casting a warm glow over her cosy parlour, and sat with a fresh pot of chamomile tea to steady her nerves. The warning suggested urgency, a deadline looming at midnight. But which midnight? Tonight, tomorrow, or some symbolic hour yet to come? And who was the hunter? Reginald Harrington, the mysterious Mr. Carter, or someone else entirely. Miss Marple's fingers traced the note's elegant script, identical to the one that had summoned her to Willow Cottage. Whoever wrote it knew more than they let on, and she intended to find out who. She began by revisiting the letters from James to Eliza, retrieving them from their hiding spot behind the fireplace brick. The flickering candlelight revealed new details in the faded ink. A mention of a trusted friend in the village who had helped arrange the child's adoption. The friend was only initialed as MC. Could it be Mr. Clement, the vicar, or perhaps his late father, who had served as vicar decades ago? Miss Marple made a mental note to probe further. For now, she decided to act on the note's warning, suspecting tonight might be the midnight in question. Donning her dark shawl and slipping a small flashlight into her pocket, she stepped out into the chilly night, locking her door with care. The village was silent, save for the distant hoot of an owl and the occasional drip of rainwater from the eaves. Her destination was the churchyard, where the sparrow's nest had first revealed its secrets. If the note's author meant to meet or leave another clue, the church was the likely spot. The path was slick with mud, and Miss Marple moved cautiously, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. As she neared the church, a faint glow caught her eye, not from the building itself, but from the graveyard beyond. She switched off her light and crept closer, hiding behind a yew tree. There, by an old mausoleum, stood two figures illuminated by a lantern. One was Lydia Blackwood, her artist's smock unmistakable even in the dim light. The other was a woman Miss Marple didn't recognize, tall and angular, with a scarf wrapped tightly around her face. Their voices were low, but she caught fragments. Too dangerous now. The locket must stay hidden. He's getting closer. Miss Marple's heart quickened. Lydia was involved more deeply than she'd let on, perhaps protecting the locket's secret or even working with the note's author. The unknown woman gestured sharply, then handed Lydia a small bundle before slipping away into the shadows. Lydia lingered, clutching the bundle to her chest, her face pale and anxious. Miss Marple considered confronting her, but held back. Lydia's fear suggested she wasn't the mastermind, merely a pawn in a larger game. As Lydia hurried off toward Willow Cottage, Miss Marple followed at a distance, her steps silent on the grass. The bundle, she suspected, was another piece of the puzzle, perhaps more letters, or even the missing diary page Lydia had mentioned in passing. At Willow Cottage, Lydia disappeared inside, bolting the door. Miss Marple waited in the shrubbery, her eyes scanning the surroundings. A rustle in the bushes made her tense, but it was only a fox, its eyes glinting before it darted away. Then, just before midnight, a new sound broke the stillness. A low whistle, sharp and deliberate, coming from the lane. She peered out to see a figure approaching the cottage, moving with purpose. It was Mr. Carter, his scarred jaw visible as he passed under a street lamp. He knocked softly, and Lydia opened the door a crack, their exchange too quiet to hear. He left moments later empty-handed, his expression stormy. Miss Marple's mind raced. Carter was the hunter, perhaps, but what was he hunting? The locket, the letters, or Lydia herself? Determined to learn more, Miss Marple circled back to the village, taking a shortcut through the orchard. There she stumbled upon a discarded cigarette butt, still smouldering, its brand foreign. Something from London, not the local shop's stock. Carter again, she thought, or perhaps Reginald, who was known to favour city habits. She pocketed the butt for later examination and returned home, her shoes muddy but her resolve firm. At her desk, she sketched a timeline. Eliza Thorne's disappearance, the locket's discovery, Carter's arrival, and now Lydia's secret meeting. The pieces suggested a conspiracy, with the Harrington estate at its heart. Could the secret child's descendants be back, seeking their inheritance? Or was this about something darker? Revenge, perhaps, for a betrayal long buried. As the clock struck midnight, a distant bell tolled, echoing the note's ominous warning. Miss Marple checked her windows and doors, her instincts telling her the hunter was close. She tucked the cigarette butt into an envelope, labeling it neatly, and hid it with the letters. Tomorrow, she would visit Mr. Clement, probing his family's past for the MC connection. For now, she sat by the dying fire, her knitting untouched, her mind weaving a net to catch the truth. The Sparrow was indeed flying, but its wings carried secrets that someone was desperate to silence. The night grows darker, and Miss Marple's pursuit of the truth edges closer to a revelation that could unravel the village's carefully guarded past as new players emerge from the shadows. Chapter 6: Echoes from the Vicarage. The first light of dawn filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cottage, painting the room in soft hues of pink and gold. But the elderly sleuth found little comfort in the beauty of the morning. The events of the previous night, the clandestine meeting in the churchyard, Lydia's exchange with the mysterious woman, and Mr. Carter's furtive visit to Willow Cottage, had left her with a restless sleep. Her dreams tangled in webs of deception and half-remembered faces. She rose early, her joints protesting the chill in the air, and busied herself with a simple breakfast of porridge laced with honey from the village apiary and a slice of buttered toast. As she ate, her eyes drifted to the envelope containing the cigarette butt, now joined by the cryptic note on her table. The scent of tobacco lingered faintly, a clue she might trace back to its smoker later. But her immediate priority was the vicar, Mr. Clement, and the enigmatic MC mentioned in the old letters. If his family held the key to the adoption, it could unlock the motive behind the growing shadows over St. Mary Mead. After tidying her breakfast dishes with her usual meticulous care, Miss Marple selected a modest woolen dress in soft grey, paired with a brooch of polished jet that had belonged to her mother, a subtle reminder of her own family's long history in the village. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders against the lingering dampness from last night's rain, and set out for the vicarage, her handbag clutched firmly, containing the letters for reference if needed. The village was stirring to life. The milkman rattled his bottles on doorsteps, children scampered toward the schoolhouse with satchels bouncing, and the blacksmith's hammer rang out in rhythmic clangs from his forge. Miss Marple nodded greetings to passers-by, her expression serene, but her mind was a whirlwind of questions. She noted the postman, Mr. Higgins, delivering a thick envelope to the Harrington estate gate, another piece of correspondence that might warrant investigation later. The vicarage was a charming Georgian house adjacent to the church, its facade adorned with climbing roses that, even in autumn, clung stubbornly to their thorns. Miss Marple knocked on the polished brass knocker, and after a moment the door opened to reveal Mr. Clement himself, his clerical collar slightly askew and a book of sermons tucked under his arm. He was a man in his late 50s, with wire-rimmed spectacles perched on a nose that had seen too many hours bent over dusty tomes, and a kindly face etched with lines of quiet wisdom. "Miss Marple, what a pleasant surprise!" he exclaimed, ushering her into the study with a wave of his hand. The room was a haven of scholarly clutter. Bookshelves groaned under the weight of theological volumes. A globe sat dustily in one corner, and a desk overflowed with papers and an inkwell shaped like a dove. He offered her a seat by the window, where sunlight streamed in, and fetched a tray of tea from the housekeeper, Mrs. Hill, who bustled in with biscuits still warm from the oven. As they sipped their tea, Earl Grey with a splash of milk for Miss Marple, strong and black for the vicar, she eased into the conversation with talk of the upcoming harvest festival, praising his recent sermon on forgiveness. Mr. Clement beamed, but she detected a subtle tension in his posture, a slight fidgeting with his cufflinks. Gently, she steered the topic to village history, mentioning the Hargrove family and their contributions to the church. "I've been reminiscing about old times," she said innocently, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. "Your father was vicar here in the 1890s, wasn't he? Matthew Clement, I believe. Such a pillar of the community." Mr. Clement nodded, his expression fond but guarded. Yes, Father served faithfully for over 30 years. He had a way with people, always helping in times of trouble. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her voice soft and confiding. I came across some old letters recently, purely by chance, you understand, that mentioned a MC who assisted with a delicate matter involving the Hargroves. An adoption, perhaps? It would have been around that time. The vicar's teacup clattered against its saucer, his face paling as he set it down. He adjusted his spectacles, buying time, but Miss Marple's steady gaze held him. After a long pause, he sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping as if a great weight had been acknowledged. I suppose secrets have a way of surfacing, don't they? Father never spoke of it directly, but I found his journal after his passing. It detailed how James Harrington came to him in desperation. Eliza Hargrove was with child, and the scandal would have ruined them both. Father arranged for the boy to be sent to Australia, to distant relatives who could raise him discreetly. A silver locket was sent along as a token, to prove his heritage if ever needed. The revelation hung in the air like incense after a service, thick and revealing. Miss Marple encouraged him with a nod, and Mr. Clement continued, his voice gaining strength as he unburdened himself. Father swore secrecy, but he noted concerns. James feared his family would disown him, and Eliza worried about the child's future. The adoption papers were sealed, but a copy was kept in the church archives, hidden in the vestry safe. I only learned of it years later. Miss Marple's mind connected the dots. This explained Squire Harrington's frantic search in the vestry. If the papers surfaced, proving an illegitimate heir, the current Harrington line could lose everything. She probed further, asking if anyone else knew. Mr. Clement hesitated. Recently, a man inquired about old records, said he was a historian, rough sort, scarred face, and Reginald Harrington has been unusually attentive to church matters lately, donating generously but asking pointed questions. As they talked, Mrs. Hill interrupted with a plate of scones, her ears no doubt pricked by the conversation, but she retreated quickly. Miss Marple thanked the vicar for his candour, assuring him of her discretion, but inside her thoughts raced. The historian was clearly Mr. Carter, and Reginald's involvement suggested he might be the hunter from the note, or perhaps an ally in suppressing the truth. Leaving the vicarage, she felt the vicar's eyes on her back, a mix of relief and worry in his farewell. The morning had warmed, and the village green buzzed with activity. A market stall selling fresh produce, children playing tag, and the doctor, old Dr. Haydock, cycling by with his black bag. Miss Marple stopped at the bakery for a loaf, using the opportunity to chat with Mr. Thorne again. He mentioned Eliza had visited the vicarage often, helping with Sunday school art projects, and once overheard a heated argument between Reginald and the vicar about family matters. Her steps led her next to the edge of the village, where the woods bordered the Harrington estate. She wandered the paths, ostensibly gathering wildflowers for her vase, but her eyes scanned for signs of intrusion. Near a stile, she found fresh boot prints in the mud, large with a distinctive tread that matched what she'd seen at the mill. Crouching to examine them, she heard voices filtering through the trees. Reginald and Carter arguing fiercely. "You said the papers were there!" Reginald hissed, his limp evident as he paced. Carter retorted gruffly. "The old man must have moved them, and that nosy spinster's poking around. Saw her at the inn." Miss Marple's breath caught. They meant her. She slipped away unseen, her heart pounding not from fear, but from the thrill of the chase. Back home for luncheon, a cold ham salad with pickled onions from her pantry, Miss Marple spread out her growing collection of clues. The letters, the note, the cigarette butt, and now notes from the vicar's confession. The puzzle was clarifying. The secret heir's existence threatened the Harringtons, and someone, perhaps Reginald, with Carter's help, was eliminating obstacles, including poor Eliza Thorne, who might have discovered the truth through her art or the letter she found. Afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Lydia, arriving breathless, her eyes wide with alarm. "Miss Marple, I received another note, slipped under my door. It says midnight at the mill. Come alone, or the Sparrow falls." Lydia handed it over, the script matching the others. Miss Marple examined it closely, noting a faint watermark. A Harrington family crest, barely visible. They discussed over afternoon tea, Lydia confessing her meeting last night was with Eliza's aunt, who had fled the village years ago but returned upon hearing of the disappearance. The bundle was Eliza's sketchbook, filled with drawings that hinted at overheard secrets. Sketches of Reginald arguing with Carter, hidden compartments in Willow Cottage, and a map leading to the mill. Miss Marple advised caution, suggesting they inform the police inspector, but Lydia feared it would drive the culprits underground. As Lydia left, Miss Marple resolved to attend the midnight rendezvous herself, hidden in the shadows. The day waned, and she prepared. A dark cloak, her flashlight, and a sturdy walking stick that could serve as defense if needed. Evening supper was light, soup and bread, as her mind plotted. She reviewed the sketchbook, its pages revealing Eliza's keen observations, a depiction of the locket, drawn from memory perhaps, and notes on the hunter's scar. Carter then was central. As night fell, Miss Marple slipped out, the village asleep under a canopy of stars. The mill loomed ahead, its river murmuring secrets of its own. She hid behind bales of old hay, waiting. At midnight, a figure approached. Not Lydia, but Reginald, his limp pronounced in the moonlight. He waited impatiently. Then another joined him, Squire Harrington himself, his face thunderous. "This ends tonight," the squire growled. "Burn the evidence and deal with the girl if she shows." Miss Marple's gasp was silent. The Sparrow was Lydia, or perhaps Eliza, still alive. The confrontation escalated as Carter emerged from the mill, a bundle in hand, papers, no doubt the adoption records. But before they could act, a shout rang out. Tommy, the errand boy, stumbling upon the scene while night fishing. Chaos ensued. Reginald lunged, but Tommy fled, yelling for help. Miss Marple retreated into the darkness, her mind ablaze with this new twist. The Harringtons were desperate, willing to destroy lives to protect their legacy. As she hurried home, the pieces shifted once more, pointing to a climax where truths long buried would finally take flight. With alliances fracturing and dangers mounting, Miss Marple edges closer to the heart of the conspiracy, where one wrong step could silence the Sparrow's song forever. Chapter 7. The River's Murmur. The night air clung to Miss Marple's cloak as she retreated from the mill, her heart pounding not from fear, but from the electric clarity of what she had just witnessed. The confrontation between Squire Harrington, Reginald, and Mr. Carter, interrupted by young Tommy's unexpected arrival, had revealed the depth of their desperation. The bundle of papers in Carter's hand, likely the adoption records, confirmed that the Harringtons were willing to go to dangerous lengths to bury their family's past. As she navigated the moonlit path back to her cottage, the river beside her murmured softly, its ripples catching glints of starlight as if whispering secrets of its own. Miss Marple's mind churned, piecing together the threads. The locket, the letters, Eliza's sketchbook, and now the Harringtons' plot to deal with the girl. Was the girl Lydia? Or could Eliza Thorne still be alive, hidden somewhere in St. Mary Mead? Safely home, Miss Marple locked her door and drew the curtains tightly, aware that eyes might be watching from the shadows. She lit the fire, its warmth chasing away the damp chill, and spread Eliza's sketchbook on her dining table, its pages illuminated by the soft glow of her reading lamp. The sketches were meticulous, almost obsessive, capturing details she hadn't fully appreciated before. A drawing of the mill's interior, with a trapdoor sketched in the corner, another of the churchyard, showing a gravestone with the initials E.H. half concealed by ivy, and a cryptic note in Eliza's neat hand. The river hides what the sparrow seeks. Miss Marple paused, her teaspoon hovering over her cup of chamomile tea. The river. Could it hold another clue? Perhaps something Eliza had discovered before her disappearance. Determined to act before dawn, Miss Marple changed into a darker dress, one less likely to betray her presence in the night, and slipped a small notebook and pencil into her pocket alongside her flashlight. She left her cottage quietly, taking a less travelled path that skirted the village and led to the riverbank near the mill. The water was higher than usual, swollen from the recent rains, its surface a restless mirror reflecting the clouded sky. She moved cautiously, her shoes sinking slightly into the muddy bank, and scanned the area for anything out of place. Near the mill's crumbling wall, she spotted a glint of metal half buried in the silt. Kneeling, she brushed away the mud to reveal a small brass key, its surface etched with a tiny sparrow. Her pulse quickened. This was no accident. The key, likely dropped in the chaos of the previous night, could unlock the next piece of the puzzle. As she pocketed the key, a rustling in the reeds made her freeze. She switched off her flashlight and crouched low, her breath shallow. A figure emerged from the darkness, moving stealthily along the riverbank. It was Mrs. Baxter, the neighbour who had delivered jam to Willow Cottage. But her usual cheerful demeanour was gone, replaced by a furtive urgency. She carried a burlap sack, its contents clinking softly as she knelt by the water's edge. Miss Marple watched as Mrs. Baxter buried the sack beneath a pile of stones, glancing nervously over her shoulder before hurrying back toward the village. The act was suspicious. Mrs. Baxter was a gossip, not a conspirator, or so Miss Marple had thought. Waiting until the woman was out of sight, she approached the stones and carefully unearthed the sack. Inside were several silver trinkets, a candlestick, a brooch, and a small frame, all bearing the Hargrove crest. Were these stolen from Willow Cottage, part of the Sparrow's gift Eliza had mentioned? Miss Marple reburied the sack, marking the spot with a small twig to find it later, and returned to her investigation. The key burned in her pocket, urging her back to the mill. Slipping inside through a loose board, she navigated the dusty interior, the air thick with the scent of mould and old grain. The trapdoor from Eliza's sketch was tucked beneath a pile of rotting sacks, its edges barely visible. With effort she pried it open, revealing a narrow ladder descending into darkness. Her flashlight beam illuminated a damp cellar, its walls lined with shelves holding mouldy ledgers and rusted tools. At the far end, a locked wooden box sat on a stone ledge, its lid carved with a sparrow. The brass key fit perfectly, and with a soft click, the box opened to reveal a bundle of yellowed documents tied with twine. They were legal papers, detailing the adoption of a boy named Edward Hargrove, born to Eliza Hargrove and sent to Australia in 1892. A handwritten note attached read, "To be claimed only by the bearer of the locket." The discovery was monumental, but before she could read further, footsteps echoed above. Miss Marple extinguished her light and pressed herself against the damp wall, her heart steady despite the danger. The trapdoor creaked, and a lantern's glow descended. Reginald Harrington, his limp pronounced as he climbed down awkwardly. He muttered to himself, cursing Carter's incompetence, unaware of her presence. He rummaged through the shelves, clearly searching for the box she now held. Miss Marple clutched the documents tightly, her mind racing for an escape. Using the shadows, she edged toward the ladder, timing her movements to Reginald's distracted grumbling. As she reached the top, a board creaked under her foot, and Reginald spun around, his lantern swinging wildly. "Who's there?" he barked, his voice edged with panic. Thinking quickly, Miss Marple tossed a loose pebble across the cellar, its clatter drawing his attention to the opposite corner. She slipped out and replaced the trapdoor, moving swiftly into the night. The river's murmur seemed louder now, as if urging her to safety. She took a circuitous route home, avoiding the main paths, and arrived breathless but unharmed. Locking her door, she spread the documents on her table, her eyes scanning the details. Edward's birth certificate, a letter from James Harrington promising provision for the boy, and a map of St. Mary Mead with a mark near the river, a spot not far from where Mrs. Baxter had hidden the sack. The map suggested another hiding place, perhaps the final piece of the Hargrove legacy. Morning brought a knock at her door. Inspector Craddock, the local police officer, his face grim. "Miss Marple, we found something by the river. A girl's scarf caught in the reeds. It's Eliza's." His tone suggested hope, but also fear. She might still be alive, but in peril. Miss Marple shared nothing of her findings yet, only promising to keep her eyes open. As he left, she resolved to visit the river's marked spot. But first, she needed to confront Mrs. Baxter. Why was she hiding Hargrove relics, and whose side was she on? The day unfolded with a sense of urgency, the village's calm facade cracking further with each revelation. The river's secrets are rising to the surface, and Miss Marple knows the next clue could lead her to Eliza, or to the heart of a conspiracy that threatens to engulf St. Mary Mead in scandal. Chapter 8. The Hidden Hollow. The morning sun struggled through heavy clouds, casting a muted glow over St. Mary Mead, as Miss Marple prepared for a day that felt heavier with each passing hour. Inspector Craddock's visit had confirmed her worst fears. Eliza Thorne's scarf by the river suggested she might still be alive, but in grave danger. The documents from the mill's cellar, now safely tucked inside a hollowed-out book on her shelf, painted a clearer picture of the Harringtons' motives, protecting their estate from a long-lost heir. The map, included in the papers, with its mark near the river, beckoned her like a siren's call. But first, she needed to confront Mrs. Baxter about the buried sack of Hargrove relics. Was the village gossip entangled in the conspiracy, or merely a reluctant pawn? Miss Marple slipped on her sturdy boots, pinned her hat firmly against the autumn breeze, and set out, her handbag heavier with the weight of the brass key and her notebook. Her first stop was Mrs. Baxter's cottage, a tidy dwelling with geraniums spilling from window boxes, their red blooms defiant against the grey day. She knocked, and Mrs. Baxter answered, her apron dusted with flour and her eyes widening in surprise. "Miss Marple! Come in, come in. Fancy a cuppa." Her cheerfulness felt forced, her hands fidgeting as she ushered Miss Marple to a chintz-covered chair in the parlour. The room was cluttered with knickknacks, porcelain shepherdesses, framed samplers, and a photograph of a young Mrs. Baxter with a man who bore a striking resemblance to the late James Harrington. Miss Marple noted it silently, accepting a cup of strong tea as she eased into her questions. "I was by the river last night," she began, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "Such a lovely spot, though I noticed some stones disturbed. Looked like someone buried something there." Mrs. Baxter's cup rattled in its saucer, her smile faltering. "Oh, you know how the riverbank shifts after rain," she said, too quickly. Miss Marple pressed gently, mentioning the Hargrove crest on the silver items she'd glimpsed. The older woman's face crumpled, and after a long pause, she confessed, "I didn't mean no harm, Miss Marple. Reginald, he's been paying me to keep quiet. Found those bits in my attic, left from when my mother worked as a maid for the Hargroves. He said they were family heirlooms, nothing more. But I saw him with that Carter fellow, plotting something fierce. They threatened to tell the village I'd stolen them if I didn't help." Her voice broke, tears welling. "I buried them to keep them safe, but I swear I don't know what they're after." Miss Marple patted her hand, her mind cataloguing the details. Mrs. Baxter's mother, a Hargrove maid, might have known about the secret child, perhaps even helped conceal the locket. But her fear of Reginald and Carter suggested they were tightening their grip, silencing anyone who knew too much. Promising to keep Mrs. Baxter's secret for now, Miss Marple left, her thoughts turning to the river's marked spot. The map pointed to a bend where willows drooped over the water, their branches trailing like fingers. She took a quiet path through the fields, avoiding the village centre where curious eyes might linger. The riverbank was deserted, save for a heron stalking fish in the shallows, its stillness mirroring her own cautious approach. At the bend, the map's mark aligned with a gnarled willow, its roots twisting into the earth like ancient hands. Miss Marple knelt, her gloved fingers probing the soil. Beneath a tangle of roots, she found a hollow, concealed by a flat stone. Inside was a tin box, rusted but intact, its lid engraved with the same sparrow as the locket. Her heart quickened as she pried it open, revealing a single item, a folded letter, sealed with red wax and addressed to the heir of the Sparrow. Breaking the seal, she read words penned in James Harrington's elegant hand. "My son, if you hold this, you know your birthright. The locket proves your claim. Seek the truth in the hollow of the old oak at Meadow's End. But beware those who guard the nest." Meadow's End was a secluded meadow beyond the village, a place of childhood picnics and whispered legends. As she tucked the letter into her handbag, a twig snapped behind her. Spinning around, she saw no one, but the heron took flight, its wings beating a warning. She hurried away, her senses alert, and headed toward Meadow's End, a mile's walk through rolling pastures. The meadow was quiet, its grasses swaying in the breeze, and at its center stood the old oak, its trunk wide enough to hide a man. She circled it, searching for the hollow mentioned in the letter. High up, just within reach, a knot in the bark gave way to reveal a cavity. Inside was a velvet pouch containing a single item, a gold signet ring, identical to the one in the locket's photograph, bearing the Harrington crest. This was the final proof of the heir's claim, a treasure the Harringtons would kill to keep hidden. Her discovery was interrupted by the crunch of boots on grass. Ducking behind the oak, Miss Marple peered out to see Mr. Carter approaching, a spade in hand and a grim set to his jaw. He began digging near the tree, muttering about finishing this tonight. She realized he was searching for the same hollow, likely tipped off by Reginald or the squire. Holding her breath, she waited until he paused to wipe his brow, then slipped away through the tall grass, her small frame blending with the shadows. Back in the village, she stopped at the post office to collect her thoughts, where Mrs. Price handed her a telegram that had arrived that morning. It was from a contact in London, an old friend who dealt in antiques, Harrington Artifacts Flooding Market. Suspicious buyer, Australian accent, asking for Sparrow-marked items. The telegram sent a chill through her. An Australian buyer. Could this be the heir or a descendant, returned to claim what was theirs? Or was it a ruse, orchestrated by Carter to cover his tracks? Miss Marple returned home, locking the door and drawing the blinds. She placed the ring with the documents in her hidden book, her mind racing. Eliza's disappearance, the locket, the letters, and now the ring all pointed to a legacy someone was desperate to erase. Lydia's safety was at risk, and Tommy's encounter at the mill suggested he too was in danger. She resolved to warn them both, but first she needed to confirm the Australian connection. A call to her London friend was in order, but the village's only telephone was at the post office, and she dared not risk it until morning. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the ring's weight a silent promise in her mind. She reviewed Eliza's sketchbook again, noting a final drawing, the oak at Meadow's End, with a shadowy figure watching from the distance. Was it Carter, Reginald, or someone new? The village clock chimed 10, each toll a reminder that time was running out. She penned a quick note to Inspector Craddock, hinting at evidence by the river without revealing too much, and slipped it into her mailbox for the morning post. As she prepared for bed, a soft thump outside her window made her pause. Peering through a crack in the curtain, she saw nothing but darkness, but the sense of being watched was unmistakable. The meadow's secrets have yielded their treasure, but Miss Marple knows the true cost of the Sparrow's legacy is yet to be paid, as the hunter's shadow looms ever closer. Chapter 9. The Australian Shadow. The night passed uneasily for Miss Marple, her sleep punctuated by the creak of floorboards and the occasional gust rattling her cottage windows. The gold signet ring, now hidden with the other clues in her hollowed-out book, seemed to pulse with the weight of a century-old secret. The telegram about an Australian buyer seeking Sparrow-marked artifacts had ignited a new theory. The heir, or someone claiming their legacy, had returned to St. Mary Mead. But were they an ally in uncovering the truth, or another player in the dangerous game surrounding the Harrington estate? Dawn broke, with a thin mist cloaking the village, and Miss Marple rose with purpose, her mind sharp despite the late hour she'd spent poring over Eliza's sketchbook. Today, she would trace the Australian connection and warn Lydia and Tommy, whose involvement made them targets in this escalating conspiracy. After a frugal breakfast of tea and toast with marmalade, Miss Marple dressed in a tweed skirt and a warm cardigan, her practical shoes ready for the day's investigations. She slipped the telegram into her handbag alongside her notebook, where she'd jotted questions. Who was the Australian buyer? Did they have the locket's counterpart, or were they after the ring? And how did Carter and the Harringtons know of their presence? Her first task was to use the post office telephone to contact her London friend, Mr. Grayson, the antique dealer who'd sent the telegram. The village was stirring as she stepped out, the milkman's cart clattering past, and the scent of fresh bread wafting from the bakery. At the post office, Mrs. Price was sorting mail, her usual chatter subdued as she handed Miss Marple a key to the telephone booth. "You look troubled, Miss Marple," she remarked, her eyes curious. Miss Marple smiled thinly, deflecting with a comment about the weather, and shut herself in the booth. The call to Mr. Grayson was brief but illuminating. His voice crackled over the line, eager to share details. The buyer's a man named Edward Langley, mid-40s, arrived from Melbourne last month. He's been scouring auctions for Hargrove family items, specifically anything with a sparrow motif. Paid a fortune for a silver tray last week. Said it was for his birthright. Odd chap. Keeps to himself, but he's staying at a boarding house in Chelsea. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. Edward Langley. Could he be a descendant of Edward Hargrove, the secret child? The timing of his arrival, coinciding with Eliza's disappearance and Carter's presence, was no coincidence. She asked Mr. Grayson to keep watch and report any further moves, then hung up, her next step clear. She needed to find Langley, or at least confirm his presence in St. Mary Mead. Her next stop was Willow Cottage to check on Lydia, whose nervous demeanour and secret meetings suggested she knew more than she'd shared. The cottage gate was ajar, and Miss Marple's knock went unanswered. Peering through a window, she saw the parlour in disarray, canvases overturned, paintbrushes scattered, and a single sparrow sketch pinned to the wall with a knife. Her heart sank. Lydia was either in hiding or taken. She scribbled a note urging Lydia to contact her if she returned and slipped it under the door, then hurried to the bakery to find Tommy. The boy was sweeping the shop floor, his face pale and eyes darting nervously. "Miss Marple," he whispered, pulling her aside. "I saw something last night after the mill. Mr. Carter was talking to a stranger near the bridge, a man with a funny accent, not from here. They mentioned Eliza, said she's safe for now, but won't be if she talks." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. The stranger's accent could be Australian, matching Langley. She pressed Tommy for details. The man was tall, with sandy hair and a limp. Not Reginald's war injury, but something subtler, like an old wound. She thanked him, slipping him a peppermint from her bag, and cautioned him to stay quiet and avoid Carter. As she left, the boy's words echoed. Eliza was alive, but safe for now suggested a ticking clock. The river, the mill, and now the bridge. Every clue pointed back to the water's edge, where the map's final secrets might lie. Miss Marple decided to revisit the riverbank near the Willow, where Mrs. Baxter's sack of relics remained hidden, hoping for another clue. The river was quieter today, its surface smooth under the mist. She located the twig marking the buried sack and checked it was undisturbed, then scanned the bank for signs of recent activity. Footprints, fresh and deep, led from the water to a thicket of brambles. Parting the thorns carefully, she found a small canvas bag, hastily abandoned. Inside was a photograph of a young woman, Eliza Thorne, smiling at a village fair. But the back bore a chilling message in unfamiliar handwriting. "Leave the sparrow's nest, or she joins the river." Miss Marple's breath caught. The threat was clear, aimed at whoever was uncovering the truth, Lydia, herself, or even Langley. She tucked the photograph away, her resolve hardening. Eliza was being held to silence the heir's claim, and the bridge meeting suggested Langley might be complicit or manipulated. Determined to act, Miss Marple headed to the bridge, a stone arch spanning the river just beyond the village. The mist hung low, cloaking the structure in an eerie haze. She searched the area, finding a cigarette stub matching the one from the mill, Carter's brand, confirming his presence. Beneath the bridge, scuffed dirt revealed signs of a struggle. A torn scrap of fabric, blue like Eliza's coat, and a single earring, a cheap trinket she'd often worn. Miss Marple pocketed both, her mind piecing together a timeline. Eliza had been here, perhaps meeting Langley or confronting Carter, and was taken to keep her silent. The Australian's role was murky. Was he a victim seeking his heritage, or a predator exploiting the chaos? As she returned to the village, a figure emerged from the mist. Inspector Craddock, his expression grim. "Miss Marple, we've had a tip. A witness saw a girl resembling Eliza near the bridge 2 nights ago, with a man who limped. We're searching the area now." She nodded, withholding her findings for now. The police needed evidence, not theories. She promised to share any observations and hurried home, the day waning into dusk. At her cottage, she found a new note slipped under her door, in the same elegant script as before. "The sparrow's truth lies with the heir. Find him before the hunter does." The urgency was palpable, and Miss Marple realized Langley was the key. Friend or foe, he held answers. She sat by her fire, the photograph, earring, and note joining her collection of clues. A plan formed. She would contact Mr. Grayson again to track Langley's movements and arrange a discreet meeting with Inspector Craddock to share select details, protecting Lydia and Tommy. As the village clock chimed 8, a distant shout broke the evening calm. Someone calling her name. Peering out, she saw Tommy running toward her gate, breathless. "Miss Marple, it's Lydia. She's back at the cottage, but she's hurt." The news jolted her into action. Her shawl grabbed as she followed Tommy into the night, the spectre of the Australian heir looming larger than ever. The hunter's net tightens, and Miss Marple races against time to protect the living and uncover the truth as the Sparrow's final flight draws near. Chapter 10. The Sparrow's Truth Unveiled. Miss Marple hurried through the misty lanes of St. Mary Mead, her heart racing as she followed young Tommy toward Willow Cottage, where Lydia awaited, injured and vulnerable. The night was thick with tension, the village's usual calm shattered by the secrets unravelling around the Harrington legacy. Tommy's breathless warning echoed in her mind. Lydia was hurt, and time was slipping away. The clues she'd gathered, the locket, the adoption papers, the signet ring, Eliza's sketchbook, and the cryptic notes, pointed to a conspiracy rooted in a century-old scandal. The Australian, Edward Langley, was the final piece. But whether he was the heir seeking justice or a pawn in a darker scheme remained unclear. As she approached the cottage, its windows dark save for a faint flicker, Miss Marple steeled herself for the truth, knowing this night would reveal the Sparrow's secrets or silence them forever. The door to Willow Cottage hung ajar, creaking in the breeze. Inside, Lydia sat slumped in a chair, a bandage wrapped clumsily around her forearm, her face pale but defiant. "Miss Marple, thank God," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They came for me, Carter and another man. I fought them off, but they took the sketchbook." She explained how she'd returned home to find the door forced open, Carter waiting inside with a stranger she now recognized as Edward Langley. They demanded the locket and any documents, believing she held the key to the Harrington fortune. Lydia had escaped through a window, cutting her arm on broken glass, but not before overhearing their plan to meet at the old oak in Meadows End at midnight to end it all. Miss Marple's mind clicked. Midnight, the hour foretold in the notes. She urged Lydia to stay hidden and sent Tommy to fetch Inspector Craddock, promising to return soon. With the village clock nearing 11, Miss Marple slipped out, her dark cloak blending with the shadows. She took a hidden path to Meadows End, the meadow silent under a sliver of moon. The old oak loomed ahead, its gnarled branches casting eerie shapes. She hid behind a hedge, her flashlight off, and waited. Minutes ticked by, each one heavy with anticipation. At last, figures emerged. Squire Harrington, his face thunderous. Reginald limping nervously. Mr. Carter gripping a satchel, and Edward Langley, tall and sandy-haired, his limp subtle but unmistakable. They gathered by the oak, their voices low but heated. "You've botched it, Carter," the squire growled. "The girl's alive, and that meddling spinster's onto us." Carter snarled back. "Langley's the problem. He's been sniffing around, claiming he's the heir." Langley's voice cut through, calm but firm, with a distinct Australian twang. "I am Edward Hargrove's grandson. The locket and ring prove it. My grandfather was sent away to hide your family's shame, but I've got the papers to claim what's mine." He held up a folder, its edges worn, likely the adoption record stolen from the vestry. Reginald lunged for it, but Carter restrained him, his scarred face twisting. "We burn it all tonight, and the girl goes in the river. No loose ends." Miss Marple's blood ran cold. Eliza was alive, held somewhere nearby. The mention of the river confirmed her fears. The bridge, where the scarf and earring were found, was their hiding place. Before she could act, a rustle nearby betrayed another presence. Mrs. Baxter emerged, clutching a lantern, her face ashen. "I can't do this anymore," she cried. "You said no one would get hurt." The squire rounded on her, but Langley seized the moment, grabbing the satchel from Carter. Chaos erupted. Carter drew a knife, Reginald shouted, and the squire swung his cane. Miss Marple, thinking quickly, tossed a stone into the bushes, the noise distracting them. As they turned, she slipped closer, her eyes scanning for a sign of Eliza. A muffled cry came from the oak's base, where a tarp covered a hollow. She lifted it to find Eliza Thorne, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with fear, but alive. Miss Marple worked swiftly, loosening the ropes with her small pocket knife. Eliza whispered, "They took me after I found the locket in the attic. Langley saved me from Carter, but he's after the fortune." Before they could escape, headlights pierced the darkness. Inspector Craddock's police car, with Tommy in tow. The men froze as officers swarmed the meadow, their lanterns illuminating the scene. Carter bolted, but Craddock tackled him, the knife clattering to the ground. Reginald collapsed, sobbing, while the squire stood defiant, shouting about his rights. Langley, clutching the folder, surrendered quietly, his face a mix of relief and resignation. In the hours that followed, the truth unravelled at the police station. Eliza, freed and wrapped in a blanket, explained how she'd found the locket while sketching at Willow Cottage, triggering Carter's pursuit. He'd been hired by the squire to retrieve all Hargrove artifacts, fearing an heir's claim would bankrupt the estate. Reginald, desperate for his inheritance, had aided Carter, unaware that Langley, the true heir, had returned to reclaim his birthright. Mrs. Baxter, coerced by threats to her reputation, had hidden relics to protect her family's name. Lydia's involvement was innocent. She'd been documenting the village's history through her art, stumbling on the diary by chance. The mysterious notes, it turned out, were from Langley's aunt, Eliza's long-lost relative, who'd returned to warn of the danger but feared direct confrontation. Miss Marple handed over her clues. The locket, ring, letters, and adoption papers to Craddock, who pieced together the legal case. Langley's claim was verified, entitling him to a portion of the Harrington estate. though he vowed to share it with the village for restoration projects. Carter faced charges of kidnapping and theft, while the squire and Reginald were arrested for conspiracy. Mrs. Baxter, remorseful, confessed fully, earning leniency. Eliza, shaken but resilient, reunited with her father at the bakery, her sketches now evidence in the case. As dawn broke over St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple returned to her cottage, the village settling into a wary peace. She sat by her fire, knitting resumed, her mind already wandering to the next puzzle life might bring. The sparrow's nest was empty at last, its secrets laid bare, but the village would never forget the night its truths took flight. The mystery of the sparrow's nest is solved, but the echoes of its secrets linger in St. Mary Mead, a testament to Miss Marple's quiet brilliance. If you've enjoyed this tale, grab a cup of tea, hit that subscribe button, and join us for more stories. Your support means the world to us.